I never imagined that buying my dream mountain property in Estes Park, Colorado would turn into a legal nightmare involving a power-hungry homeowner association president, a historic blizzard, and a lawsuit that would drag half the neighborhood into court. My name is Oliver Stanton, and I had spent 15 years working as a civil engineer in Denver before I finally saved enough to buy the mountain retreat I had always wanted. The property was spectacular. A 5-acre plot with a rustic cabin perched at 7,800 feet elevation, surrounded by towering pines and offering breathtaking views of the Continental Divide. The purchase price was steep, but the private mountain driveway that snaked up from the main road was worth every penny. It was a quarter-mile long, carved into the mountainside decades ago, and according to my deed, my survey, and every piece of documentation I received at closing, it belonged entirely to me. The trouble started 3 weeks after I moved in, on a crisp October morning when I was hauling lumber up my driveway for some deck repairs. A silver BMW came racing up behind me, horn blaring, and nearly rear-ended my truck. I pulled over to let the aggressive driver pass, but instead she stopped and got out. She was a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive sunglasses, and an expression that suggested she had been personally offended by my existence. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You cannot park in the middle of the community access road." I climbed out of my truck, confused. "This is my driveway. I own it." Her eyes narrowed. "I am Patricia Hartwell, president of the Mountain Ridge Homeowner Association. This driveway provides access to several properties, including yours, which makes it community property under our bylaws. You should have received our welcome packet." I had received no such packet, and I told her so. I also pulled out my phone and showed her the property survey that clearly indicated the driveway was within my property boundaries. "See this line? My property extends 15 feet on either side of the driveway center line. The whole thing is mine." Patricia barely glanced at my phone. "Your realtor clearly misled you. This has been an access road for the community since these lots were subdivided in 1987. I have been president of this HOA for 8 years, and I know these properties inside and out. Then you should know that my deed explicitly lists this driveway as part of my parcel," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I am happy to send you a copy of the survey and the title report." "The survey is wrong," she snapped. "We will be discussing this at our next board meeting. In the meantime, I expect you to keep this access road clear and properly maintained. We have had complaints about potholes." She got back in her BMW and drove off before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my mouth open. That evening, I dug through all my closing documents again. Everything was crystal clear. The driveway was mine. The previous owner, an elderly man named Robert Chen, had maintained it himself for 30 years. There was no easement granting access to other properties. There were no other properties that even needed access through my driveway, since they all had their own roads leading to the main highway. I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Webb, first thing the next morning. He reviewed the documents and confirmed what I already knew. "You have sole ownership of that driveway, Oliver. No easements, no shared access agreements, nothing. If this HOA president wants to claim otherwise, she needs to produce documentation." "Can she actually do anything?" I asked. "She can try to bully you, but she has no legal standing. However, I would document everything. If she continues to harass you, we may need to send a cease and desist letter." I thanked him and hung up, hoping that would be the end of it. It was not. 2 days later, I found a notice zip tied to my mailbox. It was printed on official-looking letterhead from the Mountain Ridge HOA, demanding that I attend a mandatory meeting to discuss violations of community standards and misuse of shared infrastructure. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at Patricia Hartwell's house. I showed up, mostly out of curiosity. Patricia's house was enormous, a modern glass and timber structure that probably cost 3 times what I had paid for my property. A dozen people were already seated in her cavernous living room when I arrived. Patricia stood at the front like a general addressing her troops. "Now that everyone is here," she said, shooting me a pointed look even though I was actually 5 minutes early, "we can begin. Our first order of business concerns Mr. Stanton and his misunderstanding about the access road to his property." I raised my hand. "There is no misunderstanding. I own that driveway." Patricia ignored me. "As I have explained to Mr. Stanton, The road in question has historically provided access to multiple properties in our community. His refusal to acknowledge the shared nature of this infrastructure is creating problems for everyone. An older man in the back raised his hand. Patricia, I have lived here for 20 years. Nobody uses that road except whoever lives in that cabin. It has always been private. Patricia's face flushed. Frank, you are out of order. The board has already reviewed the situation. What board? Frank shot back. You mean you and your daughter? Because nobody else gets a say around here. A younger woman sitting next to Patricia glared at Frank. She had the same sharp features as Patricia and was presumably the daughter in question. The board consists of myself, my daughter Michelle, who serves as treasurer, and Tom Bradley, who serves as secretary, Patricia said stiffly. We were elected according to proper procedures. You elected yourselves, another woman muttered. The meeting devolved into chaos. It turned out that Patricia had essentially appointed herself president of an HOA that most of the neighborhood did not even realize existed. She had filed the incorporation papers herself 5 years ago and had been collecting dues from a handful of residents who were too intimidated to refuse. The HOA had never been mentioned in anyone's deed because it had not existed when most of the properties were sold. I stood up. I did not agree to join any HOA, and based on what I am hearing, most of you did not either. My driveway is my private property, and I would appreciate it if everyone would stop referring to it as community property. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. You cannot just opt out of community obligations because you find them inconvenient. We have rules here. Show me where I agreed to your rules, I said. Show me the covenant in my deed. Show me any legal document that binds me to this HOA. She could not because no such document existed. I walked out and half the room followed me. We stood in Patricia's driveway comparing notes. It turned out that only 4 households were actually paying dues to Patricia's fake HOA, herself, her daughter, and 2 elderly couples who thought they had to. Everyone else had either ignored her demands or had never received them. Frank, the older man who had spoken up, shook my hand. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her. She's been trying to control this neighborhood for years. Why does she care about my driveway? I asked. Frank hesitated. Her daughter Michelle wants to build a vacation rental property on the lot adjacent to yours. But that lot does not have road access. The only way to reach it would be through your driveway. Everything suddenly made sense. Patricia was not confused about property rights. She was trying to steal my driveway to benefit her daughter's business venture. I went home and immediately called Marcus Webb. I need you to send that cease and desist letter, and I think we should file a quiet title action to make absolutely sure there's no question about my ownership. Marcus agreed. Within a week, Patricia received a formal letter from my attorney explaining that she needed to stop making false claims about my property. The letter also informed her that I would be filing a lawsuit to confirm my title if she continued her harassment. Her response was to file her own lawsuit claiming that an implied easement existed based on historical use. It was completely frivolous. The driveway had only ever served my property. But defending against the lawsuit still cost me time and money. November arrived, and with it came the first snow. Mountain living was new to me, but I had prepared carefully. I had a 4-wheel drive truck, snow tires, a plow attachment, and a generator in case of power outages. My driveway was steep in places, and I knew I would need to keep it plowed throughout the winter. What I did not know was that Patricia would use the weather as a weapon. The first real storm hit on a Tuesday morning. 8 inches fell overnight, and I was out at dawn with my plow clearing the driveway. I had just finished when Patricia's BMW came sliding up the hill. She stopped and rolled down her window. You need to plow all the way down to the main road, she called out. The community expects the access road to be maintained. This is not a community access road, I called back, and I already plowed it. You just drove up here, did you not? You left snow on the edges. It is a safety hazard. I looked at the driveway. It was perfectly clear. There was some snow piled on the sides because that is how plowing works, but the driving surface was completely clean. The driveway is fine, I said. And even if it were not, I am not required to maintain it for anyone but myself. Patricia's expression turned cold. We will see about that. She drove away, and I thought that was the end of it. But that afternoon, I came home from a supply run to find that someone had scattered rock salt all over my driveway. Not just a light application, but bags and bags of it, concentrated heavily in areas where it would run off directly into the drainage ditches that fed into the creek running through my property. I was furious. Heavy salt application like this could contaminate the groundwater, kill vegetation, and damage the driveway surface itself. I called the sheriff's office to report vandalism, but the deputy who came out said there was not much they could do without proof of who had done it. "Do you have security cameras?" he asked. I did not, but I installed them that weekend. 4 cameras covering the full length of my driveway with night vision and motion detection. I also had soil and water samples taken from the drainage areas to document the contamination for potential legal action. The cameras proved their worth almost immediately. 2 days after installation, they caught Michelle Hartwell, Patricia's daughter, driving up my driveway in a pickup truck and stopping to dump more salt. I had video of her face, her license plate, and the bags of salt in the truck bed. I sent the footage to the sheriff's office and to Marcus Webb. This time, the deputy took it more seriously. Michelle was charged with criminal mischief and trespassing. She was furious when the deputy showed up at her door with a summons, and she immediately called her mother. Patricia called me within the hour, screaming into the phone, "How dare you have my daughter arrested? She was trying to help maintain the community road." "She was trespassing and vandalizing my property," I said calmly. "I have it on video. If she or anyone else comes onto my land without permission again, I will press charges every single time." "You're going to regret this," Patricia hissed. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." She hung up, and I sat there wondering what she could possibly do next. I found out the following week when I received notice that the county was investigating me for illegal modification of a public access road. Patricia had filed a complaint claiming that I had narrowed the driveway and created a safety hazard. It was absurd. I had not modified anything, but I still had to take time off work to meet with a county inspector and provide all my documentation proving that the driveway was private and unchanged. The inspector was apologetic. "This is clearly a private driveway on your property," he said. "I do not know why this complaint was filed, but there is no violation. I will close this out today." "Can you tell me who filed the complaint?" I asked. He checked his paperwork. "A Patricia Hartwell. She claimed to be representing the homeowner association." I added the false complaint to the growing list of incidents I was documenting. Marcus said we could potentially sue for harassment, but he advised waiting until we had a resolution on the title issue. December arrived, and the weather forecasts started predicting a major winter storm. The meteorologists were calling it a once-in-a-decade event, with predictions of 3 to 4 feet of snow and wind gusts up to 70 miles per hour. Blizzard warnings were issued for the entire Front Range. I spent 2 days preparing. I stocked up on food, fuel for the generator, and propane for heat. I made sure my plow was in perfect working order and filled every container I owned with water in case the pipes froze. By the time the first flakes started falling on Thursday evening, I was ready. What I was not ready for was the email that arrived Friday morning. It was from Patricia, sent to every email address she had apparently collected from neighborhood residents over the years. The subject line read, "Emergency, Community Access Road Closure." The email claimed that due to the severe weather, I had illegally closed the community access road and was preventing emergency services from reaching multiple households. It demanded that I immediately reopen the road and provide emergency maintenance throughout the storm. I read it 3 times, trying to understand what she was talking about. I had not closed anything. My driveway was open. Nobody needed access through it except me, because no other properties connected to it. Then I looked out my window and understood. At the base of my driveway, where it met the main road, Patricia's car was parked sideways across the entrance. She was creating a closure herself and blaming me for it. I pulled on my winter gear and hiked down through the already accumulating snow. Patricia was sitting in her car with the engine running. When she saw me coming, she rolled down her window with a triumphant expression. "You cannot keep this road closed during an emergency," she said. "I am not closing anything. You are literally blocking the entrance right now. I am documenting your violation of community safety standards." The snow was falling heavily now, and the wind was picking up. This was insane. "Patricia, go home. There is a blizzard coming. This is dangerous." "Not until you agree to provide proper maintenance of the community access road." I pulled out my phone and took pictures of her car blocking the driveway. Then I called the sheriff's office. "I have someone blocking my driveway and refusing to move during a blizzard emergency." The dispatcher said they would send someone, but it might be a while because they were already getting storm-related calls. I went back up to my cabin and watched from the window. Patricia sat in her car for another hour before finally giving up and driving away. By then, visibility was down to almost nothing. The storm hit with full force Friday night. Wind howled around the cabin and snow piled up at a rate of 3 inches per hour. I lost power around midnight, but my generator kicked in automatically. I stayed up watching the security cameras, which showed nothing but swirling white. Saturday morning, the world was buried. Snowdrifts reached up to the cabin's windows in places. The driveway was completely impassable, buried under 4 feet of snow with drifts twice that high in spots. The storm was still raging, and the Weather Service said it would continue through Sunday. I was stuck, but I was comfortable and safe. I had everything I needed. I made coffee, cooked breakfast on my propane stove, and settled in to wait out the storm. Then my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. "Mr. Stanton, this is Deputy Jennifer Cole with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. I am calling about a complaint we received from Patricia Hartwell. She claims you have blocked emergency access and that there are residents trapped without supplies." I explained the situation, including the fake HOA, the lawsuit, and Patricia's harassment. "Deputy, there are no residents who need access through my property. She is lying. My driveway only serves my cabin. Everyone else in this area has their own access roads." "Can you send me documentation of that?" I emailed her my survey, my deed, and a Google Maps satellite image showing the property boundaries and roads. She called back 20 minutes later. "You are right. I do not know what Ms. Hartwell is trying to accomplish, but she has filed 3 complaints this morning claiming there is a safety emergency. I just wanted to verify the situation." "She is trying to establish some kind of legal claim to my driveway," I said. "My attorney and I are in the middle of a title dispute with her." The deputy sighed. "I will note this in my report. Please let us know if she continues to harass you." After I hung up, I made a decision. If Patricia wanted to claim my driveway was essential community infrastructure, I was going to make absolutely certain everyone understood it was private property. I spent the rest of Saturday planning. The storm finally cleared Sunday morning, leaving behind a crystalline landscape of deep snow and brilliant sunshine. My driveway was completely buried. It would take days to clear it properly. But first, I had a gate to install. I had been thinking about putting a gate at the bottom of my driveway since the salt incident, mostly for security. Now it would serve a dual purpose, security and an unmistakable declaration of private property. I had researched options and found a company in Fort Collins that made custom steel gates. The problem was that with 4 feet of snow on the ground, installation would be nearly impossible. Unless I did it during the storm cleanup, when I was already moving massive amounts of snow and earth. Monday morning, I fired up my truck and started the long process of plowing out. It took all day just to clear the upper half of the driveway. Tuesday, I worked on the lower half, pushing snow into massive piles on either side. By Wednesday, I had a passable path from my cabin down to the main road. That is when I saw Patricia's car parked at the bottom again. She got out as I approached in my truck. Finally, she said. "I need you to clear the access road down to the other properties immediately." "What other properties?" I asked, exhausted and covered in snow. "Patricia, there are no other properties accessed through my driveway. Michelle's lot needs access. Michelle's lot is empty. There's nothing there. No building, no utilities, nothing. She has a right to access her property. Then she needs to build a road on her own land. This is my driveway." Patricia's face turned red. "You are violating community standards and creating a safety hazard. I am going to have you cited." I had reached my limit. "No, you are not. You are going to leave and you are not going to come back. And just so we are absolutely clear about whose property this is, I am installing a gate." I called the gate company that afternoon. For an extra fee, they agreed to do an emergency installation. The crew arrived Friday with a massive steel gate, posts, concrete, and all the hardware needed. Despite the freezing temperatures, they worked all day and had it installed by sunset. The gate was beautiful in an industrial sort of way. 12 feet wide, 7 feet tall, solid steel painted black, with a keypad entry system and my house number prominently displayed. Signs on either side read, "Private property, no trespassing," and "Owner assumes no liability for unauthorized entry." I stood back and admired it. This was my property, and now nobody could pretend otherwise. Patricia saw the gate Saturday morning and lost her mind. She showed up screaming, demanding I remove it immediately. When I refused, she called the sheriff's office claiming I had created a safety hazard. A different deputy came out, looked at the situation, and told Patricia there was nothing illegal about putting a gate on a private driveway. "But it is not private!" Patricia shrieked. "It is community property!" The deputy looked at her tiredly. "Madam, I have reviewed the property records. This is private property. You need to leave." That should have been the end of it, but Patricia was not done. She filed an emergency motion in court claiming that my gate was blocking access during a weather emergency and creating a dangerous situation. She demanded I be held in contempt and forced to remove the gate immediately. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Marcus Webb prepared a detailed response with all our documentation, plus photographs showing that no other properties were accessed through my driveway, affidavits from neighbors confirming the driveway had always been private, and a report from a land surveyor confirming the boundaries. I showed up to court expecting a quick dismissal. Instead, I found Patricia with her own attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who immediately started arguing about historical access rights and community expectations. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Sandra Ortiz, listened to both sides with increasing impatience. "Ms. Hartwell," she finally interrupted, "do you have any documentation showing an easement or access agreement?" Patricia's attorney shuffled papers. "Your Honor, we believe an implied easement exists based on the historical use and the reasonable expectations of the community." "Historical use by whom?" Judge Ortiz asked. "Mr. Stanton's counsel has provided affidavits from 7 different long-term residents stating that this driveway has only ever served the single cabin. Where is your evidence of community use?" "My daughter's property requires access," Patricia said. "Your daughter's property is an empty lot," the judge said, looking at the survey. "It has never been developed, and according to this plat map, it has its own access from Forest Service Road 43. "That road is not maintained," Patricia protested. "That is not Mr. Stanton's problem." Motion denied. "Ms. Hartwell, if you continue to harass Mr. Stanton regarding his private property, I will consider sanctions. Do you understand?" Patricia looked like she had been slapped, but she nodded. I thought that would finally be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday evening, I was cooking dinner when my security cameras alerted me to motion at the gate. I pulled up the feed and saw Michelle Hartwell bolt cutting the lock. I immediately called 911 and headed down the driveway in my truck. By the time I got there, Michelle had cut through the lock and was swinging the gate open. Her pickup truck was parked on the road, loaded with what looked like surveying equipment. "You're trespassing," I said, getting out of my truck. "I've already called the police." "This is community property," Michelle said. "My mother's lawyer is going to prove it." "Your mother's lawyer already failed in court. Leave now." "Make me." I did not have to. Sheriff's deputies arrived 5 minutes later. Michelle tried to claim she had a right to access her property through my driveway, but the deputies were not interested in her arguments. She was arrested for criminal trespassing, criminal mischief for the destroyed lock, and resisting arrest when she refused to put her hands behind her back. Patricia called me that night, but I did not answer. She left a screaming voicemail, threatening to sue me for having her daughter arrested. Marcus advised me to save the voicemail as evidence of harassment. The next development came from an unexpected source. Frank, the older neighbor who had spoken up at Patricia's meeting, called me with interesting information. "Oliver, I did some digging into this HOA Patricia created. I used to work in real estate law before I retired. Did you know that the incorporation papers she filed with the county are fraudulent?" "What do you mean?" "She listed 8 property owners as founding board members, but none of them actually signed the incorporation documents. I checked with 3 of them personally. They never agreed to be part of any HOA. Is that illegal? Extremely. It is fraud. She filed false documents with the county clerk's office. That is a criminal offense. Frank put me in touch with the other property owners whose names had been forged. All of them were furious when they learned what Patricia had done. Together, we filed a complaint with the county district attorney's office. The DA's office took it seriously. A prosecutor named Michael Torres called me in for an interview. I provided all my documentation regarding Patricia's harassment, the fake HOA, and the forged incorporation papers. This is a pretty clear case of fraud, Torres said. We will be investigating. In the meantime, do not have any contact with Ms. Hartwell or her daughter. That was fine with me. I installed a new, even stronger lock on my gate and added more security cameras. March brought warmer weather and the beginning of snowmelt. It also brought criminal charges against Patricia Hartwell. She was indicted on 3 counts of forgery, 1 count of fraud, and 1 count of filing a false police report. Michelle was charged separately for the trespassing incident. The local newspaper picked up the story. HOA president charged in fraud scheme, read the headline. The article detailed how Patricia had created a fake homeowner association, forged documents, and harassed neighbors who refused to comply with her demands. My phone started ringing with calls from other people in the area who had dealt with Patricia's attempts at control over the years. Several had received threatening letters demanding compliance with fake HOA rules. One couple had paid thousands in dues that Patricia had pocketed. Another had been hit with a fake fine for leaving their trash cans visible from the street. The whole thing was a scam that had been running for years, and nobody had thought to investigate because Patricia was wealthy, confident, and convincing. She had used the trappings of official authority to bully people into compliance. The criminal trial was scheduled for June, but there was also the civil side to deal with. Marcus filed a lawsuit on my behalf for harassment, trespass, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We also sued to recover the costs of the gate, the security cameras, the legal fees, and the water remediation needed because of the salt dumping. Several other neighbors joined with their own lawsuits. Patricia suddenly found herself facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential damages. Her attorney tried to negotiate a settlement, but I refused. This was not about money anymore. It was about making sure Patricia could never do this to anyone else. The criminal trial began on June 15th. I testified about the harassment, the false claims about my driveway, and the fake HOA. Other neighbors testified about Patricia's years of intimidation and extortion. The county clerk testified that the incorporation documents contained forged signatures. Patricia's defense was that she had genuinely believed she was creating a legitimate HOA and that any errors in paperwork were innocent mistakes. Nobody believed her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Ortiz sentenced Patricia to 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, and ordered her to pay restitution to everyone she had defrauded. Michelle pleaded guilty to her charges and received 6 months jail time plus community service. The civil suit settled shortly after the criminal verdict. Patricia agreed to pay me $87,000 covering all my costs plus damages. The other plaintiffs received similar settlements. Patricia had to sell her massive house to cover the payments. By August, it was finally over. My gate stood solid and uncontested at the base of my driveway. My property was secure and clearly marked. The fake HOA had been dissolved, and the county had purged all its fraudulent filings from the records. I was sitting on my deck one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, when Frank stopped by with a bottle of whiskey. "Thought you might want to celebrate," he said. We sat and drank and talked about everything that had happened. Frank told me stories about the neighborhood before Patricia had started her power games, back when people actually helped each other instead of fighting over imaginary property rights. "You did good standing up to her," Frank said. "Most people just rolled over because it was easier, but that just made her worse." "I just wanted to be left alone," I said. "I bought this place to get away from drama." Frank laughed. "Well, you got drama anyway, but you won. That is what matters." He was right. I had one. More importantly, Patricia would never be able to bully anyone in this neighborhood again. The following winter brought more snow, including another major storm in January. This time, nobody complained about my driveway maintenance. Nobody demanded I plow for the community. Nobody filed false reports or scattered salt or cut my locks. I plowed my own driveway on my own schedule, and life was peaceful. Spring arrived, and with it came new neighbors. The couple who bought Patricia's old house were retirees from Texas named Robert and Linda. They were friendly, respectful, and seemed genuinely happy to be in the mountains. When they introduced themselves, they mentioned they had heard about the HOA situation. "Want you to know we have no interest in any of that nonsense," Robert said. "We are here to enjoy the mountains and leave people alone." "That's all anyone wanted," I said. Over time, the neighborhood returned to normal. People waved when they drove past. We helped each other out during storms and emergencies. There were no more HOA meetings, no more demands, no more harassment. My gate remained, a permanent reminder of the importance of property rights and the danger of letting petty tyrants go unchallenged. Visitors sometimes asked about it, and I would tell them the story. Most people were shocked that someone had tried to steal a private driveway by simply declaring it was community property. But that is exactly what Patricia had attempted. She had figured out that most people do not carefully review their property documents, do not know their legal rights, and are intimidated by official-sounding demands. She had counted on people being too busy, too confused, or too scared to fight back. She had been wrong about me. I had spent months and thousands of dollars defending my property rights, but it had been worth it. My driveway was mine. My property was secure. And I had helped expose a fraud that had been hurting my neighbors for years. Sometimes I think about that day in the blizzard when I decided to install the gate. It had been a defiant gesture, a line in the snow, a declaration that I would not be bullied. It had also been the turning point. Once that gate went up, Patricia could no longer pretend there was any ambiguity about ownership. The gate forced the issue into the open, where it could be resolved in court with facts and documentation instead of intimidation and false claims. 2 years after I bought the property, I was finally able to just enjoy it. I spent my weekends hiking, working on the cabin, and appreciating the incredible views. I made friends with neighbors who shared my love of mountain living. I learned to navigate winter storms with confidence, and every time I drove through my gate and up my private driveway to my cabin, I felt a sense of satisfaction. This was mine. I had fought for it, defended it, and won. The legal system had worked eventually. The criminal justice system had held Patricia accountable for her fraud. The civil courts had compensated the victims. The county had corrected its records. It had taken time and effort and money, but justice had been served. I kept in touch with Marcus Webb, who told me the case had become something of a cautionary tale in local real estate law circles. Other attorneys were advising clients to carefully verify any HOA claims and to challenge suspicious demands for dues or compliance with rules. The county had also tightened its procedures for HOA incorporation, requiring more documentation and verification of member consent. Patricia's fraud had exposed loopholes in the system, and those loopholes were being closed. In a way, my stubborn defense of my driveway had led to broader reforms that would protect other property owners. That felt good. Life in the mountains was everything I had hoped it would be. The air was clean, the views were spectacular, and the sense of space and freedom was priceless. I had no regrets about buying the property, and I would do it all again if I had to. But I was grateful I did not have to. Patricia was serving her sentence, Michelle was doing community service, and the neighborhood was at peace. My gate stood solid and unchallenged, a monument to the principle that property rights matter and that bullies can be beaten if you are willing to fight. I had learned important lessons through the whole ordeal. I learned that documentation is crucial, that standing up for your rights is worth the effort, and that most people will support you if you are in the right. I learned that legal battles are exhausting and expensive, but sometimes necessary. I learned that seemingly powerful people often rely on intimidation because they actually have no real authority. Most importantly, I learned that my mountain property was exactly what I needed. It was my refuge, my project, my investment, and my home. The fight to keep it had only strengthened my connection to it. Friends from Denver sometimes visited and asked if I ever considered moving back to the city. I always said no. I had everything I needed right here: my cabin, my land, my driveway, and my gate. The gate had become something of a local landmark. People giving directions would say, "Turn left at the big black gate." Hikers sometimes stopped to take pictures of it against the mountain backdrop. It had gone from being a defensive necessity to being a symbol of the property itself. I kept it well maintained, touching up the paint each spring and making sure the electronic keypad worked perfectly. The lock was the highest quality I could find, and I had spare keys hidden in secure locations just in case. Every time I punched in the code and watched the gate swing open, I felt a moment of satisfaction. This was mine. All of it. The gate, the driveway, the land, the cabin, the view. I had paid for it, I had fought for it, and I had won. The seasons cycled through. Summer brought wildflowers and warm afternoons on the deck. Fall brought golden aspens and crisp air. Winter brought snow and the cozy comfort of the cabin with the wood stove burning. Spring brought snowmelt and new growth and the promise of another year in the mountains. Through it all, my gate stood firm, my driveway remained private, and my property rights stayed secure. Patricia's attempt to steal my driveway by simply declaring it community property had failed completely. Her fake HOA had been exposed and dismantled. Her fraud had been prosecuted and punished. Justice had been served, and I had prevailed. Looking back, I could see how each step of the process had been necessary. The initial confrontation had established the conflict. The documentation had provided the proof. The gate had forced the issue. The legal battle had resolved it. The criminal prosecution had ensured accountability. If I had backed down at any point, if I had accepted Patricia's false claims, if I had tried to appease her or compromise, I would have lost my property rights. She would have established an easement through adverse use or implied consent. She would have won, and I would have spent years fighting to reclaim what was already mine. Instead, I had stood firm from the beginning. I had insisted on documentation. I had refused to accept false claims. I had installed the gate at the perfect moment, during the blizzard cleanup, when the contrast between her hysteria and my actual situation was most obvious. The timing had been important. Installing the gate during the worst blizzard of the decade had made a statement. It had shown that even during an emergency, I had the right to control access to my private property. It had demonstrated that Patricia's claims of community need were fabricated. If there had been real emergency access issues, I would have been putting lives at risk. But there were no such issues because the driveway only served my property. The blizzard had actually helped my case by forcing everyone to confront the reality of the situation. When Patricia claimed people were trapped without access, the authorities had investigated and found her claims were false. When she claimed the driveway was essential infrastructure, the storm had proved otherwise, since nobody except me needed it. I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I had been more accommodating. What if I had let Michelle use my driveway to access her empty lot? What if I had agreed to maintain it as a community road? The answer was clear. I would have lost control of my own property. Once I had granted access, it would have been nearly impossible to revoke. The Hartwells would have claimed an easement by permission that had ripened into a permanent right. They would have brought lawsuits claiming they had relied on my permission in making business decisions. I would have been stuck maintaining a road for their benefit forever. By refusing from the start, by insisting on my legal rights, by installing the gate and standing behind it, I had prevented that outcome. I had kept what was mine. The experience had changed me in some ways. I was more cautious about people who claimed authority they did not actually have. I was more diligent about documentation and verification. I was more willing to fight when fighting was necessary. But it had not made me cynical or paranoid. Most people in the neighborhood were good, honest folks who respected boundaries and treated their neighbors well. Patricia had been an outlier, a person who had seen opportunity in confusion and had tried to exploit it for personal gain. Her downfall had been instructive. She had overreached, had pushed too hard, had made false claims that could be disproven. If she had been smarter, if she had been more subtle, she might have succeeded in creating her fake HOA and extracting money from people indefinitely. But her personality had worked against her. She had been too aggressive, too demanding, too convinced of her own authority. She had made enemies when she should have been building alliances. She had filed false reports when she should have been negotiating. She had committed fraud when she should have been seeking legal advice. Her own actions had ensured her defeat. As for me, I had learned that sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing. Standing up to Patricia had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. There had been moments when I had wondered if it was worth it, if I should just sell the property and move somewhere easier. But I had stuck it out, and I was glad I had. The property was worth fighting for. My rights were worth defending, and the principle of private property ownership was worth upholding. The gate remained my favorite part of the whole story. It was such a simple thing, a barrier across a driveway, but it represented so much more. It represented boundaries, both physical and legal. It represented ownership and control. It represented the right to say who could and could not use my property. Most importantly, it represented the idea that some things are worth fighting for. Property rights matter, boundaries matter, truth matters, justice matters. Patricia had tried to blur those lines, to create confusion where there should have been clarity, to claim ownership where she had none. The gate had eliminated the confusion. It had drawn a clear line. It had made an unambiguous statement, and it had worked. Years from now, long after the legal battles were forgotten, that gate would still stand. Future owners of the property would probably keep it, would appreciate its security and its clear marking of boundaries. They might not know the full story of why it was installed during a historic blizzard, but they would benefit from it. That continuity pleased me. I had not just defended my own rights, I had established a precedent and created a physical barrier that would protect future owners too. The property would remain clearly private, clearly controlled, clearly mine, and then theirs. As I sat on my deck that evening, watching the last light fade from the mountains, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what I had wanted when I had left Denver and bought this property. Peace, beauty, solitude, and the freedom to live life on my own terms. I had fought for that freedom and won. My mountain driveway was mine, my gate was secure, and my property rights were established beyond any doubt. Patricia Hartwell was serving time for her fraud, and the fake HOA was dismantled forever. It had been quite a journey from that first confrontation in October to this peaceful evening in late summer. I'd learned a lot, spent more money than I wanted to on lawyers, and dealt with stress I had not anticipated. But it had all been worth it. Every penny, every hour, every moment of frustration and anger and determination. Because at the end of the day, I had my mountain cabin, my private driveway, and my gate. And nobody, not Patricia Hartwell or anyone else, could take that away from me. The sun finally set behind the peaks, and I went inside to make dinner. Tomorrow I would wake up in my cabin, on my property, at the end of my driveway, behind my gate. And that was exactly where I wanted to be.